Right, so this week we're going to be fitting the MOTONE Customs sump guard and the adjustable gear change lever. But first of all, if you remember, there was that rust on the frame plate that connects the two down tubes on the frame. So I just quickly want to go through that. Now, it wasn't particularly bad, and some would argue that I'm going to be covering it up so it doesn't really matter, but the truth of the matter is rust never gets any better, it only gets worse. And if it's left to deteriorate, eventually it is going to become a big problem. Now, it's a 2-minute job to take it off, and the first thing to do is just to flat it back around where the rust damage is with a 100 grit paper. There is absolutely no need to remove all the paint that's on this plate if it's undamaged. Just concentrate on the areas that already have rust on them and feather them out. Now, there was some pitting, no doubt from stone chips, that had caused the rust in the first place, and rather than grind all the metal away, what I decided to do was use the magic rust pen from Tetrosyl. Now, this actual chemical itself is nothing new, it's just a mixture of tannic acid and resins that converts the rust into a more stable compound. But what is new is this nifty new applicator pen. It's basically just like a marker pen, and you just paint over the areas where the actual rust exists, leave it for 15 minutes until it turns black, and this will ensure that you've got a stable substrate on which to start painting. Right, next, and this is a bit of a belt and braces job, a couple of medium coats of red oxide. Now, I tend to use these Tetrosyl trade paints, and these are the kind of thing that I used to use when I was in the painting game many years ago. Fantastic for refinishing engineering parts, roof racks, stuff like that. It dries quicker and it's much more durable than the stuff that you'll normally buy in your local motor factors. But with the advent of the internet, it's available to just about anybody. And generally speaking, it works out a lot cheaper than buying the over-counter paints at your motor factors. Now, I started off with 2 medium coats of red oxide. These flash off and the touch dry in about 10 minutes under normal room temperature. Now, the great thing about red oxide is it is very tough, it sticks to the metal really well, and it does in itself form a weather-tight seal unlike normal primer. So this is going to be a big help stopping rust from reforming. After that, a couple of medium coats of normal grey primer, followed by 3 medium coats of satin black. Now, this satin black is really good. It dries to a finish that exactly matches the powder coating on this old Triumph T100. All 3 coatings are exactly the same, 10 minutes to flash off and touch dry. And what I did after that is I just hung the plate up in front of a long wave infrared heating lamp for about an hour and a half. This cured it off completely. And there's 2 little tests you can carry out to make sure it has cured off. First of all, it shouldn't smell of paint anymore. All the solvents should have evacuated from your work. And secondly, if you press your thumbnail into it, it shouldn't leave a mark. If it does, it's not cured properly. Now, don't try to dry something like this off on a radiator or in front of a gas heater or a normal elemental electric heater. That won't work. It needs to be infrared. If you don't have an infrared dryer handy, don't worry, just leave it for a few days and keep checking it with the tests that I've just described to you. Now, I put the red oxide primer on because inevitably when you torque some heavy bolts down onto a steel plate like this, it is going to damage the paintwork no matter what paint you've used. And the red oxide was there simply to protect the areas where I know the paint is going to be scrubbed off by those bolts. Now, Triumph recommend 22 Newton meters for each bolt to fasten this plate on, but what I did is I just secured it by the 2 bottom bolts because we're now going to be fitting the sump guard and it requires different bolts for the top in order to attach the sump guard bracket. These come with the MOTONE kit. They're slightly longer than the original bolts at 20 millimeters, and that's just to accommodate the extra thickness of the sump bracket that comes with the MOTONE kit. And when you're putting this back on or you're putting the bracket on, just take a little bit of time to line everything up by eye and make sure it all looks straight. It will make a difference when it comes to putting the sump guard on. Now, just to explain this mottled effect on all these parts, everything in this area was treated with wax oil and allowed to dry before assembly. including the brackets that come with the MOTONE sump guard. This is just to ensure that we don't have any future rust problems. Now the sump guard's made from aluminium and it's been black powder coated, although it does have the appearance of being anodised. This sump guard kit is made exactly the same as the original Triumph sump guard kit for this bike, and it fits using exactly the same methods. It is a well-known accessory, and I have noticed that this particular accessory has been appearing on some very influential builds over the last year or so. Now the OEM Triumph accessory is quite a plain piece, but MOTONE have laser cut the letter T and the image of two upright pistons into the front of the sump guard, which might not be to everyone's taste, but personally I like it. Now we've already installed the front sump guard bracket when we put that plate back on, but also with the kit you'll find two hook shaped brackets, and these fasten the rear of the sump plate in place. Before you begin installation there is just one little job to do. There's a lead that runs from the starter motor to the rear of the engine, and it's routed underneath the engine along the right hand side lower frame rail. Now there are two clips that hold it in place, and the clip towards the front needs to be removed because it will actually get in the way of the installation. First of all, just remove the cable from the clip. Then with a small flat bladed screwdriver prise the clip out of the frame. I just placed a workshop wipe over the end of the screwdriver blade just to stop it from scratching the frame while you're removing it. Once that's been removed, put it somewhere safe, you might need it in the future, and you're ready to put the sump guard in place. Now it might not be strictly necessary, but you know me. Just as a precaution, I then took a couple of pieces of adhesive neoprene foam and stuck them on the tab at the rear of the sump guard near to the outside edges. This is just to protect the frame. This part of the sump guard presses up against the frame, and while you're fitting it there is a slight amount of sliding backwards and forwards required under pressure to locate it and get everything lined up, and this is just to prevent that from scratching the frame. As I say, it's not strictly necessary and it doesn't come with the kit. This stuff is readily available, it's very cheap, and you can get it from any DIY store. Either way, you can now offer the sump guard up to the frame of your bike ready to start fixing it in place. First of all, in the fitting kit that comes with the guard there are two 16mm Allen head bolts. Use these to loosely attach the top of the sump guard to that bracket that we originally fitted when we put the plate back in place. As I said, just put them in loosely, don't tighten them up because you need some movement. The sump guard should then hang there quite happily unsupported without causing any damage to anything. Right, the next part I couldn't really show you. I couldn't get a camera angle on this that was of any use, and in actual fact I couldn't see it myself. I had to locate these by feel, and that is those two hooked brackets need to be hooked over the top of that bottom frame rail in the gap that sits between the oil filter and the rear of the sump. Now you're not going to be able to see this, you're going to have to feel your way with your fingers. There is a gap of about an inch and a half, just big enough for these to fit in. And you need to hook them in place with the threaded flange facing downwards and inwards towards where you're going to offer your sump plate up to it. Now in order to get everything lined up correctly, what you may need to do is put some hand pressure on the front of the sump plate just below that first bracket to push it backwards and to get it into the position that it needs to be in. You can then with your hand feel where the hook brackets are, move them accordingly, and carefully thread your bolts with a washer on and loosely fasten them up. Now during this period, keep checking with your fingers that the bolts and the brackets are not fouling either on the oil filter or on the rear of the sump. This is very important. It's quite easy. As you're tightening it up, keep poking your finger in there just to make sure that there is a bit of a gap all the way around it and it's not fouling on anything. And then gradually tighten these bolts up. Providing you've got everything positioned correctly, you should then tighten all these fasteners up to 18 Newton meters. And that is basically the sump guard installed. Now sump guards just used to be the preserve of scramblers, dirt bikes, that kind of thing, but that's not relevant anymore. I think it's widely recognised that as well as them making the bike look good, they also serve to protect the lower half of the bike, not just from stone chips and road debris, but also from the day-to-day filth and grime that gets thrown at the front lower half of your frame and engine. Which brings us neatly onto that short shift gear changer. Now I'm a size 10 shoe, so I don't exactly have small feet. But one thing that I did notice right from the start with the T100 is that it seemed to be a bit of a reach to the gear shifter. And I felt from the start that it could do with being a little bit further back. I felt like I was operating it with the end of my toes. Now MOTONE responded to this some time back with a competition style fully adjustable short shifter. There are no airs and graces with its design. It's designed to do a job, and it looks very much like the apparatus that you see fitted to competition bikes. Fitting it and adjusting it to your taste is simplicity itself. First of all, simply remove the existing one by means of the Allen bolt underneath, and simply put the MOTONE short shifter onto the gear selector, but don't tighten it up yet. Now simply insert it onto the splines at roughly the angle that it should be at. Then sit on the bike and see how it feels. Now if the gear knob needs moving, simply remove the gear lever from the spline again, undo that little bolt at the back, and then slide it back to approximately where you think it should be. Then repeat that procedure. Keep doing this until you get it where you want it. For me, at a size 10, I found about the midway position was perfect. You can then tighten the nut that holds the gear selector onto the spline. Now adjustment doesn't stop there, because you can actually adjust this gear changer for angle too. The gear change lever incorporates a unique hinge adjustment mechanism, which is released by means of an Allen bolt halfway down the shaft. Once released, this allows you to fine-tune the angle of the gear changer to exactly suit your requirements. And although the look of this gear lever might not suit everybody, it's a custom part which is uniquely customizable in its own right, allowing you to fine-tune the ergonomics of how your gear lever operates in conjunction with your body. Now in just a half an hour's journey, you can easily be changing gear hundreds of times. And if your gear lever doesn't fit you exactly, stress and fatigue can soon become a problem around your ankle muscles. As well as, in my opinion, looking good and very purposeful, this gear lever essentially allows you to dial that stress and fatigue out. And it's one of those items that helps fit the bike to your body and the way you ride. Now that about wraps it up for this week. In the next episode, episode 4, we're going to be removing those horrible Battenberg decals from the bike and taking a look at the paintwork and what steps we need to take to renovate it and get it looking back to showroom condition. And of course, we'll also be adding 1 or 2 more parts to the bike. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you found it useful. And once again, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and please subscribe to the channel. I'll see you on Friday as usual. So until then, take care and ride safe.